The first video I released on this channel was about Outer Banks. So when the new season was released, I almost felt obligated to make a video on it. Now, the way I watch a show like The Outer Banks is much different than how I watch a show like Rings of Power or The Last of Us, as I don't take the show nearly as seriously, and am far more forgiving in a lot of respects. A show like Outer Banks isn't supposed to be the pinnacle of television. As long as I am having fun with the show, I consider it a success, as I am mainly watching for it to scratch the treasure hunting itch and for the show's vibes. That's why it doesn't bother me too much when characters act like idiots, when there are some wonky things like John B's gator bite going completely untreated and forgotten by season 3. There being bad CGI, like seriously, what are these crabs? Or there being some very obvious and goofy looking stunt doubles, like when Rafe transforms into an old guy, or when Pope temporarily shaves his head. Yeah, these things aren't good, and I would prefer if they weren't in the show, as they're incredibly sloppy and can be distracting, but at the end of the day, they don't really ruin my enjoyment. I feel like it all comes down to your expectations, and what you want out of the show. On a different show, I would be much more critical of these things, but to me, Outer Banks is what it is. As long as I'm having fun, I'm not too hung up on the details. For me, the worst crime a show like Outer Banks can do is be boring and feel like a complete waste of time, something that the show has struggled with in the past. And unfortunately, it continues to struggle with this, as in season 3 it falls into the same pitfalls over and over again. This season, Outer Banks goes on episode-long subplots that feel completely pointless and little more than a distraction from the main story. A lot of moments and the directions that characters take feel forced and seemingly come out of nowhere. There are a few meta moments where the show is trying to say, yeah, there were some things in the past that were kind of dumb.
What would you do different? Yell, murder, ward.
And while there may not be a singular moment that was as stupid as there was in season 2, the faults of season 3 might be more egregious as it repeats the same mistakes, having learned nothing from its previous failings. In many ways, Outer Banks season 3 feels creatively bankrupt, and like the writers have no idea how to fill its 10-episode runtime, as they rely on their worst instincts and repeat ideas that were never entertaining in the first place. Before jumping into specifics, here's your spoiler warning for season 3 of Outer Banks.
Like messing up my relationship.
Ruining my kid and his party right
that's
now,
what you're
okay?
worried about?
I would just
you
walk
feel good
away,
about
John.
yourself? Huh?
One of my major issues with the second season of the show was how a lot of the show's storylines ultimately felt like a waste of time, as the show tries to trick the audience that something exciting is happening when it really is just the writers trying to kill time. In season 2, this manifests itself in the Bahamas heist, John B and his prison troubles, and the Topper, Sarah, John B love triangle. Instead of learning from their mistakes and moving on to new and more exciting storylines, Outer Banks decides to bring back the classics, subjecting the audience to more of the same dross as before. All of the aforementioned season 2 storylines make an appearance in season 3 to some degree or another. Subbing in for the Bahama heist of the gold is the train heist of the cross. And even if I give the show some credit that this heist was more visually interesting than its predecessor, it remains just as toothless. Before the heist even starts, the audience already knows the end result, because the show has already told us that Rafe and Barry plan on stealing it and melting it down. Knowing this, it's a little harder to get excited about the heist plan, because we know that it is ultimately a nothing burger. Outer Banks is pretty bad about creating these big set pieces that ultimately don't matter and have no fallout or real impact on the story. A perfect example of this is JJ teleporting away from his motorcycle crash, putting him in a situation that should have a big impact, but the show choosing to ignore the likely results in favor of pretending like nothing happened. Literally nothing comes from the heist in terms of any character or story progression, and it feels like a pointless one-off that you could omit if you were recapping the show. The show also repeats itself in reintroducing some legal troubles for John B after he beats up Topper. This is not as bad as the other recycled storylines as it takes up the least amount of screen time, but once again its only purpose in this season is to waste time and delay John B from going to South America. Probably the worst instance of Outer Banks wasting the audience's time and creating artificial tension comes with the reintroduction of the love triangle. It seems like whenever the show doesn't know what to do, they just usher Topper in and have his constant pining for Sarah make her second guess her relationship with John B. Not only is it painfully boring to watch, but we have seen this all before. Sarah's character motivations are pretty flimsy, as she hooks up with Topper because she had nowhere to stay for like a day, and had a minor disagreement with John B. It was established in season 1 that Sarah has a history of cheating.
What are you talking about? What happened with Denny?
She cheated on him and the guy before that. You know what that means? You're next. You're the next sucker up.
But this instance of it just makes her look really fickle and unreliable, as every little disagreement she gets in with John B sees her running back to Topper's arms. By itself, the love triangle is a terribly written and horribly boring storyline, but it is made worse by its total irrelevance in the scheme of the show. It would be one thing if after John B finds out that Sarah cheated on him, the group dynamic between the Pogues completely changed, and he decides not to get back together with her. It could be potentially interesting if John B fully ices her out and tries to go to South America without her, and then she joins forces with her dad or something. But Sarah cheating on John B literally doesn't matter at all, as they get back together in the very next episode, and everyone acts like nothing happened. Not only does Outer Banks bog down its runtime with annoying, uninteresting subplots, but it doesn't even have the courage to do them with any conviction that could potentially validate their inclusion. The love triangle is the epitome of a waste of time, because it's something they drag out every season and present to us in the same tired, contrived, and pointless manner. Also, I just wanted to mention that Topper's girlfriend is definitely not real. Not nearly as bad as the love triangle is how every season of Outer Banks reintroduces a new villain who is a mysterious rich figure looking for the same treasure as the Pogues. Singh doesn't do much for me this season, but at least the show gives him a somewhat satisfying ending. With Limbri, one of the big bads of season 2, they literally give her a piece of cloth and tell her it's the healing shroud. She believes them, walks a couple of steps, and then we never see her again. So I guess that random piece of cloth actually did heal her? It feels like the writers just didn't know what to do with her, so they clumsily wrote her out of the story, making her entire character feel pointless and like a bad joke.
I love you.
I love you too.
Relationships were definitely a part of Outer Banks' previous seasons, but this new season it felt like, as far as the show is concerned, every main character needed to be in a relationship. Now, for a lot of these teeny bopper CW type shows, the relationship drama is what a lot of viewers are most interested in. That aspect of the show doesn't really appeal to me very much, as I'm here for a fun treasure hunting adventure. However, there seemed to be a bit of a shift in the show, as the shippers seem to be one of the demographics that the third season was trying the hardest to appeal to. In my opinion, this led to some forced relationships that were robbed of any natural build-up. The show instantly starts coupling the new designated pairs from the start of the very first episode, with Pope and Cleo and JJ and Kiara. I actually don't have too much of an issue with the Pope-Cleo pair, as the actors and characters have some decent chemistry. My only issue with it is that it almost feels like its entire purpose is to help get Pope over Kiara, so there is no one in the way of the Giara ship. Speaking of the JJ and Kiara relationship, I have a lot more issues with this one.
If you're asking me if I like it, yeah, no.
From a writing and character perspective, this really does come out of nowhere, as in previous seasons they were shown to be really good friends, but there was no hints of romantic feelings. However, this season, almost immediately, they have goo-goo eyes for each other, and they have a moment early on. To me, the JJ-Kiara pairing this season feels very forced, and I think that derives from its origins in that there was a lot of outside fan pressure shipping these two characters. Shipping culture is not something I really understand, especially with the extreme lengths some people take it. In the case of the Giara shippers, they harassed the real-life partners of Rudy Pankau and Madison Bailey, as they wanted the actors to be a couple in real life.
Saying she's worthless and that I should be with Rudy because that's what needs to happen. We've never had any romantic relationship ever. And then y'all are like, they belong together.
I really hate stuff like this, where some people can't tell fiction from real life and harass innocent people for their own deluded vision. From what I have seen, there was never any intention of making JJ and Kiara a couple until the shippers started popping up. If it was me writing the show, the antics and harassment of the Giara shippers would completely turn me away from ever making them a couple on the show, as it feels like it is rewarding bad behavior, and almost feels like it is encouraging them to keep doing what they are doing. If it was the plan for JJ and Kiara to get together from the get-go, that would be a different story. But it feels to me like that is not the case, as the romantic interest between the characters comes out of nowhere this season and feels very forced. The scene where they kiss in the cabin and all of the girls cheer had me rolling my eyes, as it felt like one of those everyone clapped memes. No doubt it is the reaction the writers expected the fans to have after they finally got what they wanted, but for me it was over the top and kind of cringe. Ignoring the outside aspects of the relationship, it was also really boring to watch. After their moment on the boat, the rest of the season sees the two trying to come to terms with their feelings. Kiara keeps asking JJ to talk about what happened, and JJ keeps ignoring her. We see the same scene like 3 times, and it is just too much melodrama for me. For such a big focus of the season, it really fell flat for me.
This is the big one, kid. I've been obsessed with this since I was your age. Going out into the blank spaces, hunting for treasure.
One of the things that was highly anticipated for this season was the role that Big John Rutledge would play after it was revealed that he was still alive at the end of the 2nd season. It seems pretty clear that him being alive is a bit of a retcon from what the writers initially intended in season 1, and the story that he tells John B in this season is the writers retroactively changing the story to involve Singh. With that said, I largely enjoyed how Big John was used in the season, as well as the evolving relationship he had with John B. From what I have seen online, this is a pretty unpopular opinion, as Big John seems to be pretty hated amongst the show's fan base.
You're supposed to be dead. I think I liked you better that way.
Throughout the season, Big John reveals himself to be little more than a treasure-obsessed criminal willing to do anything to reach his goal. Even though as a person, Big John is very unlikable, I think he is an interesting character, and him being a less than perfect person and father fits pretty well considering he all but abandoned his son to hunt for a long-lost treasure. It also recontextualizes his encounter with Ward in season 1, as he no longer seems as innocent as he once did. It's not hard to imagine that their roles could have easily been reversed, with Big John leaving Ward for dead. In the early to middle part of the season, it is Big John and John B that are doing most of the actual mystery solving, which is in my opinion far more interesting than the melodrama that was occupying much of the screen time of the other characters during this time. The father-son reunion is pretty sweet, but the plot device of the bells made me laugh a little bit. It made it seem like every time his whole life that John B heard bells, he would be like, "Dad? Is that you, Dad?" He later explains there's a very specific pattern to the bells, but I still think it's kind of funny. When they are reunited, John B is elated, finally seeing his beloved father, who had been missing for over a year.
You're my boy,
And you're my dad.
you are the best boy that a dad could have.
However, his initial euphoria is slowly whittled away, as Big John starts doing and has John B participating in some less than savory activities. The contrast between what the other Pogues are dealing with at this time and what John B is doing is pretty significant. The other Pogues are like, "I like her, but I shouldn't like her even though she likes me." And John B's experience is like, "Grab the legs, boy. Help me hide the bodies, boy."
Sing it. And you're my dad.
Even though I enjoyed the Big John B stuff, it still had some issues. Like Big John completely giving up on his lifelong quest after not immediately finding what he is looking for, and him forcing John B to rob a lady at gunpoint instead of just pickpocketing her or something. Also, when Big John does shoot the smugglers, I think it would have been a little more interesting if we were not shown their perspective beforehand, because we see that they were planning on killing John B. In the minds of the audience, Big John is seemingly justified in his decision. If we didn't know their intentions, the audience would be left wondering if Big John was just using this as a justification for his actions, and is actually just trigger happy. Overall though, I enjoyed the Big John B stuff.
You want to shoot me? You can't, son. Because as angry as you are, I am your father, and you love me.
Both Rafe and Ward, the two biggest villains of the series, are kind of on the back burner for most of the season. Neither are very involved in the main plot for most of the season, as they are relegated to their own side plot. Rafe essentially does two things this season: steals and melts down the cross, and decides whether or not he wants to kill his dad. He's not in the final episode and doesn't even know anything about El Dorado. While this is disappointing, the far bigger disappointment is Ward, who does literally nothing until the final episode. He feels regret for choking out Sarah and decides to turn a new leaf. Kind of. He does some very surface level things to show his change, but it feels more like this is to trick the audience into a false sense of security, so that him making a deal with Singh is surprising. It doesn't really work, and in his last scene, he waffles back and forth from villainous to virtuous by the second. He sacrifices himself to save Sarah, and I think the show wants us to believe that he's somewhat redeemed himself. But that is not really the case. His death was actually really disappointing, especially with his lack of involvement throughout the season. It was almost comical how, in the lead up to his death, it's just a bunch of random people walking out of the jungle one by one, holding a different group of people hostage. So yeah, a disappointing end to one of the more compelling characters on the show.
We did it.
The penultimate episode of the season, Welcome to Kitty Hawk, is one of the worst episodes in the whole show in my opinion. It felt like an entirely unnecessary side quest that holds up the main storyline for a full episode. For me, it really just felt like the time dedicated to Kitty Hawk would have been better spent in South America. The main crew outside of John B and Sarah didn't really have anything to do once they actually got to South America, so if they cut the Kitty Hawk stuff, they could have been given some involvement there instead. Really, my big issue with Kitty Hawk is that it prevents us from carrying on with the main storyline and getting to El Dorado, instead giving us an entire episode of people sitting around waiting to leave. Once we actually get to South America, I actually start having a good time again. This only makes me wish further that we got to South America sooner and had more fun treasure hunting adventures there. The crew of Big John, John B, Sarah, and Ward had some good moments, and I wish we got to see this group dynamic longer. The journey to find El Dorado and the little puzzles that they had to solve was fun to watch, and this kind of content is one of the main reasons I watched the show. The City of Gold itself was a bit underwhelming, as it was little more than a large gold deposit, but the journey to get there was still good.
Who came together to solve this 500-year-old mystery. Let's hear it for them!
Overall, Season 3 of Outer Banks had some major issues, even with me grading on a scale. It is at its best when it is being a fun treasure hunting adventure, with likable characters and a fun dynamic. Unfortunately, it spends most of its time treading water and reusing boring, tired storylines that kill any fun to be had for episodes at a time. With Season 3's ending bringing the conclusion to the first major storyline of the show, I hope that Season 4 can focus less on the melodrama and more on the mystery adventure elements. I actually like this first arc as an origin story to how the Pogues became a group of treasure hunters, exploring the world and its ancient mysteries. It's a shame that future seasons will likely continue to be bogged down by relationship drama and pointless subplots. Still, Outer Banks has tremendous potential to be a really fun show. We'll just have to wait and see if it is able to live up to it. If you somehow made it to the end of the video, I want to thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, I would really appreciate if you liked and subscribed. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.